Hey, for the last couple months I've been recording different videos about Dead Cells, and I decided to summarize all of these videos with one final video where I will explain the complete story behind Dead Cells and Beheaded. So if you always wanted to learn more about Dead Cells plot and its story, then you're in the right place. Sit down comfortably because we're about to dive into a world full of blood, insanity and ruthlessness. The story of Dead Cells takes place on an unnamed island. The king of the island resided in High Peak Castle, the gates of which were protected by a gigantic skeleton guard known as the Giant. The interior of the castle was in turn defended by the royal guards, while the king by his personal guard, the Hand of the King. The Giant and Hand hated each other, but both agreed that nobody liked the alchemist. The residents of the island lived in a stilt village, where they would spend most of their time fishing as their food source. Connected to the village is the Black Bridge, acting as an exit and entrance to the prison, controlled by the prison warden, the concierge. Things quickly changed after a sudden deadly illness spread across the island. The illness was named after many things: the malaise, the gloom, or the green poison. Its symptoms were itchiness, belly aches, feeling down, headaches and blurred vision. The malaise always resulted in death. However, it reanimated the dead infected and mutated them into aggressive monsters who attacked the living. In an attempt to contain the infection, the king ordered the imprisonment and execution of anyone who was infected. Even those who were only suspected would be hanged. Additionally, the king ordered the prison warden, the concierge, to stop controlling the gates and keep all prisoners inside, even if they finished their sentence. When the cells became overpopulated due to many imprisonments, the king ordered the guards to use the outside jails and to leave no suspects unsupervised. The orders from the king had confused the guards. Why were they transferring sick villagers to the prison? They needed treatment instead of imprisonment. The guards were threatened with execution if they failed to obey the king's orders. The prisoners wrote on the walls of their cells, questioning why the prison was being filled with the innocent or how they didn't want to get infected and die. The prisoners eventually began escaping, digging tunnels to the sewers of Promenade and climbing the ramparts. However, these escapes always resulted in death to their exhaustion, starvation, or by the hands of the concierge had they gotten to the bridge. Because of the king's actions, the Giant confronted the king, warning him his actions would bring ruin to his kingdom. The king, however, ordered the Giant to be executed and have his body thrown in the prison quarters. Within the village, the villagers revolted against the king, vandalizing the statue of him and his hand, his posted orders, and even demanding his death. This led to the nights of bloody riots, after which the guards condemned a wing of the prison, the ossuary, to dump the bodies in, and an additional attempt to burn excess bodies when the graveyard became full. Even then, the bodies piled up endlessly. Burning them was no longer good enough, as they were reanimating and acquiring weapons. The king wasn't the only one taking action against the Malaise. A sorceress called the Timekeeper resorted to rewinding time to the same day, executing infected and keeping the Malaise at bay. Although this exhausted her as noticed by the alchemist. The alchemist, alongside the king and the Timekeeper, took action against the Malaise, using scientific means to find a cure. The alchemist gathered research from all over the island to learn the origin of the Malaise. He also had conducted many experiments to combat the Malaise, using corpses or villagers who volunteered their bodies for his work. His research took him into a sanctuary beneath the village. Some believed the liquid sap running through the walls of the sanctuary could have been contaminating the sewer network and thus causing the Malaise. With this knowledge, the alchemist began experimenting with the sap. Over time, he learned mutations in the infected slowed down when submerged in a solution of the sap. However, the sap provided unpredictable results on the bones of corpses. The alchemist reflects on whether the king's methods were worth killing so many people. During the final retreat, the king gave the alchemist a wing of the castle to continue his experiments. Although the royal guard once protected within succumbed to the infection, even the king himself succumbed to the malaise. As a final desperate attempt, the Timekeeper placed the island in an endless time loop, containing the malaise to the island. Within the prison, a homunculus known as the Beheaded inhabits a headless corpse and familiarizes itself with its surroundings. The Beheaded encounters a knight. She remarks him as the headless fellow that's been getting around. She also informs him he can't die and isn't the only one. After, she sends him off to journey through the island. The Beheaded encounters a few others than the knight, such as the blacksmith and his apprentice, the Collector and Gillen, all who offer upgrades, weapons and abilities to the Beheaded in exchange for something. At the end of the Beheaded's journey, it encounters the king, comatose on his throne, protected by his hand, who encases him in a protective barrier. After defeating the hand, the Beheaded destroys the barrier and impales the king with the hand's weapon. From there, the king rises and explodes, destroying the throne and the Beheaded's body. Upon returning to the prisoner's quarters, the Beheaded notices the giant skeleton next to him suddenly disappeared. Moments later, a loud crash could be heard, and behind the once unopenable, now broken door, the Beheaded catches a glimpse of the giant sinking into a pool of lava. The Beheaded remarks, "He's gone into the lava? Guess he didn't want to come back after all." With quick progression, the Beheaded encounters the giant within Guardian's Heaven. The giant reveals the Beheaded is the king. However, the Beheaded is confused by this, as he doesn't recall his actions as the king. Upon entering the Astrolab, the Beheaded uncovers more of the alchemist's experiments and research. The alchemist looked to the stars to advance his research, even for a solution. However, he contemplated whether he could be mistaken and they were the cause of the malaise. Additionally, a solution drunk by infected crows created mutations instead of curing them, resulting in the creation of the slummers. Within the observatory, the Beheaded comes across an unexpected figure, the Collector. The Collector reveals a catalyst to the Beheaded and asks him to deposit his remaining cells into it. The Collector then reveals his plans to create the panacea, the cure to all disease, with the cells he's collected. The Collector comments on how messing with cells never comes with any good. He reminisces on his past research and experiments, revealing his identity as the alchemist, even questioning if the myth of the panacea was all he had left. The Collector, upon drinking the panacea, goes mad with power. With the intention of sending the Beheaded back to prison quarters for more cells, the Collector fights him. After his defeat, the Collector exclaims that the Beheaded, when he was the king, ruined the island and he was trying to fix it. The Beheaded ends the Collector. After the Collector's death, the Beheaded realizes the cure is effective but causes his body to disintegrate. As his body begins to fade away, he says, "The kingdom may be damned to eternity, but at least I won't be stuck here with it." However, after his body disintegrates, his homunculus form is left behind. Returning to the prisoner's quarters, a portal opens and transports the Beheaded to the clock room. The timekeeper berates the Beheaded and reluctantly resets the time loop. Shortly after, she kicks the Beheaded into an opened portal without the acknowledgement of either one, as she just wanted to kick him out of the room, causing her to exclaim, "Oh no! Are you serious?" Within the new loop, the once dead tutorial knight, although glitched, is back. And so is the king. Returning to the throne room and defeating the king's hand, the Beheaded reclaims his original body as the king, wanting to stop the infection and decay in his body. He returns to the Astrolab and defeats the Collector once again. In the end, the king returns to his restored throne, sipping wine. He admits, well, there's really no way around it. It was way more fun crawling around the sewers. However, he's interrupted when his original self appears and mimics his various actions. The two engage in combat, and their fate is left ambiguous. The Arboretum was once frequented by the lords and ladies of the island for its dappled light, soothing fountains, and fresh air. However, they noted how the mushrooms of the Arboretum would shrink from their presence. When the malaise struck, not only did the dead rise, but also the plants. The alchemist requested one of these plants alive for his own research and experiments, as noted by the royal gardener. Besides the alchemist, the royal gardener had been conducting experiments as well, trapping infected into a large tree connected to a flask with a skull of giant crow mixed with various mashed organs, entrails, and local roots. The king orders the gardener to burn their arboretum to the ground. but the gardener disobeys these orders. The concierge in a letter warns the gardener to follow his orders or he would be fed to the ticks in the morass. Yet the gardener ignores the warning. The royal gardener is then stripped of the crown's protection, and the king orders his men to burn the arboretum and to ignore the gardener's protestations. However, this order wouldn't be carried out as the soldiers were killed by the mutated mushrooms. Subsequently, the royal gardener became infected with the malaise and died within the prisoners' quarters with the keys to Arboretum. Although he came back, leaving a note on how he could feel the madness lurking in the shadows and how his medical plans wouldn't help much longer, he traveled to the morass. The morass was home to the banished. Those who were leprous, diseased and poor were sent away from the castle and the village to rot away. They took refuge in the trees to be safe from the ticks that inhabit the morass. Eventually they formed a religion on a holy maternal figure whom they offered sacrifices to appease. The gardener remarked how the inhabitants of the morass were stunningly friendly and how the priest helped him brew a concoction, but this left a new pain within his stomach. As evident in a note, the gardener then continued to the shrines. The shrines were the home to various ancient structures of massive swords and giant sculpted snakes and temples filled with treasures. Living within the shrines is a pagan cult dedicated to foreign beliefs, which the king barely tolerated, who were led by the queen. The pagans were banished to the shrines by the king, a rare edict that enjoyed unanimous support. When he arrived at the shrines, the gardener hoped her, the queen of the shrines, people would help, but they couldn't recognize him any longer. His last stop was at the Undying Shores, which he knows the apostates' hideout wasn't far. Although he's unsure what welcome they reserve for strangers in need nowadays. The apostates were once respected healers of the island with many medical achievements, however some found their methods rather unpalatable, presumably to their lack of moral restraint. They were chased from the island by the king for unspecified crimes against the crown. It's said the apostates had been tampering with ancient artifacts present on the coast of the island. Aside from that, there were rumors of strange experiments and sightings of wild creatures near the shores before the Malaise. Apart from the apostates, smugglers would also use the shores as a hideout. Soon it became an escape from the king's genocidal wrath. The smugglers became disgruntled at the turning events. In his last note, the gardener mentioned how the apostates didn't fare well as the rest of the island and how he wouldn't make it to the lighthouse, finally deciding he would take a rest in the mausoleum and finalize his transformation into the Scarecrow. There is not much information about the queen. Everything we know is that for some reason he was not well known as her king and that he absolutely loved her husband. She owned the shrines which contained vaults filled with treasure and led the gains. It would be assumed that she and the royal gardener had a close relationship before the Malaise. This is evident by various notes left by the gardener, such as seeking help from the pagans and attempting to reach the lighthouse where she resided. Although he did not succeed as he was transformed into a Scarecrow. Like the Beheaded, the queen was turned into a homunculus with the exception of having 3 marks on her head, compared to Beheaded having just 1 and a halo. She was made into a homunculus by the apostates within the Undying Shores. Their reasoning for turning her is currently unknown. That's almost everything we know about Dead Cells at the current point. A new DLC called Return to Castlevania is coming, and maybe this DLC will bring a bunch of new stuff and information that we could use to find out more about Dead Cells' story. As you can see, the story is pretty much unfinished, and we still have a lot of things that are not disclosed by the developers. What will the Return to Castlevania DLC be about? Check out this video to learn more about it. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling your opinion about Dead Cells lore. I'll see you guys in another video.